My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for years I thought endurance was the same thing as strength. In my family, silence was praised. Complaints were mocked. Pain was something you handled privately, preferably without letting anyone else notice. My parents believed emotions were a kind of manipulation, and showing fear or hurt was a weakness that invited judgment instead of care. I learned early how to stay quiet. When my father remarried, I was already an expert at making myself small. His new wife brought with her a son only a year older than me. From the beginning, he filled every room with noise, anger, and unpredictability. When things broke or arguments erupted, the excuse was always ready. He's had a hard life. Don't push him. Be the mature one, Lauren. So I was. I adjusted my schedule to avoid him. I learned which floorboards creaked. I memorized the tone of his footsteps. I lived like someone trespassing in her own home, always alert, always careful. The night everything shattered didn't begin with shouting. It began with stillness. I woke just before dawn, that hour when darkness hasn't yet decided to leave. The house felt wrong, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I remember thinking I should lock my door, but before I could move, pain exploded through my shoulder. It was sudden, violent, and blinding. I didn't understand what was happening at first. My brain lagged behind my body, trying to make sense of the heat spreading under my skin. When I screamed, it came out broken and thin, like my voice didn't belong to me anymore. I saw him standing there, frozen, holding what he had used like it was an object he didn't recognize anymore. My parents rushed in. That was the moment I expected rescue. Instead, I was met with irritation. My stepmother crossed her arms and asked what all the noise was about. My father looked at the blood and sighed. Not in fear, in annoyance. She's exaggerating, my stepbrother said calmly. My mother laughed. Actually laughed. She told me I'd always been dramatic, that I probably startled myself and worked into a panic. I was bleeding. I couldn't move my arm. I was shaking so badly my teeth were chattering. And they laughed. Something inside me went cold then, colder than fear, colder than pain. I realized that no matter what happened to me in that house, I would always be the problem. While they argued over whether I needed a bandage or a lecture, I did the only thing I could. With fingers slick with blood, I sent one message. A single word. A location. Help. When I lost consciousness, it wasn't from weakness. It was from understanding. The hospital lights were too bright when I woke up. My shoulder burned with a dull, relentless ache. A nurse told me how close I'd come to permanent damage. A police officer asked questions gently, like he already knew the answers. My parents arrived later. They were angry. Angry that authorities were involved. Angry that people were asking questions. Angry that their carefully controlled narrative was slipping. They told everyone I was unstable. Emotional. Prone to overreaction. They said I'd misunderstood a harmless situation and turned it into a crisis. And people believed them. That's when I stopped trying to convince anyone with words. I went quiet. I documented everything. Every hospital visit. Every message they sent that contradicted their public statements. I kept records of their dismissals, their jokes, their threats disguised as concern. I learned how systems work. How truth survives not through volume, but through proof. Months passed. At home, they acted like nothing had happened. They joked again. Laughed again. Treated me like a nuisance that refused to disappear. They thought time would erase what they'd done. They didn't know time was working for me. When the case finally reached court, they were confident. My parents smiled at the judge. My stepbrother leaned back like this was an inconvenience, not a reckoning. I sat straight. Calm. Prepared. When it was my turn to speak, my voice didn't shake. I didn't accuse. I didn't dramatize. I told the story exactly as it happened, then let the evidence speak where words never could. Medical reports. Time-stamped messages. Recorded contradictions. A timeline that exposed lies layer by layer. The courtroom changed. You could feel it in the silence, the moment when disbelief gives way to realization. My parents stopped smiling. My stepbrother stopped moving. The judge looked at them differently now. When the verdict was delivered, no one reacted. There was no shock left, only consequence. As I walked out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd been believed. I learned something through all of this. Silence can be a prison. But when chosen carefully, it can also be a weapon. They called me dramatic. The court called it truth. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to explain myself anymore.